Internet. I am Chris Reynolds, developer advocate at Pantheon. Today on the stream, we're going to be talking about our new integrations with GitHub on Pantheon. And I have someone, a special guest, who has been thinking for a very long time about integrating Pantheon more closely with GitHub. And you probably have already guessed it because you may have seen the thumbnail, but here he is, face and all, Mr. Steve Persch. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Chris. How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. Yes, I'm excited about what we're talking about today.
Me too. I have been thinking about Pantheon and GitHub integration for a long time. I've been doing Pantheon and GitHub integration for a long time. Yes, it is something very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and I already know some of the answers, but for the sake of our audience that may be watching or viewing later, talk about your specific involvement in the GitHub integrations that we're talking about today and maybe how they came to be.
Sure. So I'll start at the beginning, and as Pantheon's unofficial historian, feel free to cut me off if I'm going back too far or spend too long in any ancient history. So to go back, hopefully quickly, more than a decade ago, when I was a Pantheon customer, I was falling in love with the GitHub workflow. I really liked the idea that every single change made to the code of the website that I was working on with my teammates, that every single code change went through a pull request. In the 4 years that I was in my previous job, from 2011 to 2015, we went from using Git, but not GitHub, using Git internally to using GitHub for basically everything. And because GitHub encourages pull requests, because GitHub shows how easy it is to review code via pull request, that became an essential part of our workflow. And working on complex Drupal sites, we wanted to have a functioning Drupal site for any branch, for any pull request. And now, again, in the ancient history of Pantheon, this was before Pantheon even had multi-dev environments. So as I was chatting with Pantheon's founders at the time, they're like, we got you on the Drupal per branch thing. Like, that is Pantheon Multidev. That's a capability that has been built into the Pantheon platform for over a decade now. The GitHub integration part has been some level of DIY for most of that, or for all that time. So going back a decade plus, I started by manually having multiple Git remotes. I would have my local clone, and I would have a remote that was the Pantheon environment and a remote that was the GitHub environment, and I would just manually keep them in sync, and had some overhead.
That sounds painful.
It was better than what I was doing before. So it was progress. It was progress, but time marches on, expectations rise, and we wanted something better. So in my first literally weeks on the job at Pantheon 10 years ago, I and Greg Anderson and others in the Pantheon world, we were doing days-long trainings, often with agency partners, showing them how to use Pantheon's tools. It would come up over and over again. How do we do the GitHub integration? Greg had written, along with Josh Koenig and others, example scripts showing how to do like GitHub to Travis CI to Pantheon, and eventually GitHub to Circle CI to Pantheon, and Bitbucket to Bitbucket pipelines to Pantheon, and GitLab CI to Pantheon. And with all those variations, that made for an essentially DIY ethos, where Pantheon, we as staff members could provide example scripts, but the onus was ultimately on the individual teams to take responsibility for what were fundamentally their CI scripts. And to some degree, that's beneficial because CI can get pretty darn complicated, and some teams will make different choices for any number of things. However, it has remained true that I do just want a simple connection between GitHub and Pantheon, and the simpler, the better, at least at the start. So I assumed for years that would be a GitHub application, and that's one of the things we'll be showing today. In the time we were working on the GitHub application, we also saw, oh, there's a lot of adoption of GitHub Actions in our ecosystem as well. There's even reusable GitHub Actions out there that have been built by people in the community. So we found it appropriate to make a GitHub Action as well.
Cool. Yeah, let's get right down to it then. I'm gonna bring up. Should I bring up your screen or should I bring up your diagram? I guess I should bring your screen first,
Let's do
right?
the screen first, just because I've used a lot of vague nouns here. Let's make sure our brains are in the same place for how this gets experienced. So an important link to go to is the GitHub repo for our GitHub action. So that's an important link to go to. Chris, if you could drop that into chat. But let's see what that does. Right now we are looking at the GitHub repository for my personal website. This is stevector.com, a not too complex Drupal 11 site. And again, the basic idea, even though this is my personal site, I'm still carrying those expectations from working with larger Drupal teams. I want a preview environment for every single pull request. So even a pull request as tiny as this one, that is just doing some very minor cleanup to a hard-coded twig file, even for that, I want a preview environment. Pantheon has the capacity to do environments per Git branch. So what I want is here in the GitHub interface to get a link to the Pantheon Multidev environment specific to this branch. So we have pull request number 224 here. We end up with a Pantheon Multidev environment here named PR224, machine name of my site. And yeah, this is not the live site. This is the Multidev environment. And I get that thanks to this GitHub action. And I'll pause there.
What I think is really cool about the GitHub action is like a lot of these things. I mean, everything that we're doing in the action are things that either other people have done in different ways or has been out sort of in the ecosystem for a while. But the thing that I discovered, and maybe you discovered in the process of working on the action, is that integrated GitHub deployments thing, where like you can actually see in GitHub and like that there's a deployment and it links to the actual site, like the actual multi-dev. Like that feels really ingrained into I mean, it's a canonical Pantheon action, right? So like it feels like we are sort of integrating Pantheon with the action itself.
Yes, and I should say this is one of many instances of a pattern of we saw this need before it was a GitHub product.
Right. Yeah.
Part of the simplification that we've been able to do with this action is stripping out some of this stuff that we DIY invented. Like some of our examples from many years ago also answered the need of, yeah, I just want to link to the multi-dev from here. But there was not a GitHub feature specifically for that. So we made one, a de facto one that would like, I probably still have sites that have this, that I would have like, well, I have too many GitHub accounts. This is one of my alt GitHub accounts. Another one of my alt GitHub accounts is called SteveVector Bot, and I would use that and its token to post the same kind of link, but post it as a comment because I want to link somewhere on this page. I'll post it as a comment via a bot account instead of, well, now this is just a thing in GitHub.
Yeah, well, and notably, like if anyone's interacted with our docs repository at all at any point in time, you will see a comments in the PRs for when the deployment actually creates a multi-dev for that branch. So that's a thing that still exists even on our own things.
Yes. Yes. So yes, that's a great example. This we have had multiple versions of such bot accounts on our docs site as well. And I mean, this gets the job done. But this just feels nicer because it's using GitHub's normal functionality. All right. Chris, next up, should we diagram this out some more?
Sure, yeah. Let's pull up. I'll hide that, and I'll pull up your crayon screen, so
Yes,
we can talk about what we're doing.
Yeah, I love a good crayon and Lego diagram, and I just can't resist the urge. And actually, this diagram is, I'll say, sort of unsatisfyingly simple. Part of my joy that I get from doing Lego and crayon diagrams is often I'm diagramming something complex, but maybe I should take it as a sign of success here that all we're trying to do here is accomplish the workflow where me on my laptop, I push up my branch to GitHub, I make a pull request there, or this also satisfies the use case of I want to push to the main branch, or a merge happens to the main branch, gets processed, as we saw, by GitHub Actions. We'll also take a look later at the GitHub Application, which is even simpler in that there's no configuration added to the GitHub Application. But in either case, we end up with the code that I pushed ends up on Pantheon in less steps than were necessary before. And I should not let it go without saying that part of the reason to do this is because we want people to look at these multi-dev environments. In my previous job, after I used Pantheon and got a taste of how much easier website operations could be, I then went to a project that, for reasons, could not be on Pantheon. I was working for a university that was like, no, we're good self-hosting. But I wanted environments per Git branch. So I made my own ugly bash script that did a similar thing. It made environments per Git branch, and it worked 60% of the time, which was frequent enough that I would use it, and a failure rate high enough for it to be really annoying. But the benefit was that I could send those links to the stakeholders and say, in this sprint, you have asked me to fix bugs in the header, the footer, and the sidebar. And I think I have fixed all three, but I really don't know if you and I will agree that I have fixed the bug in the header, the footer, and the sidebar. And part of the benefit of Git is that branches are meant to be cheap. They are inexpensive, relatively speaking, computationally. What blew my mind switching from SVN to Git now over a decade ago is just how fast it was to branch. And I want that value delivered all the way through the team, not just the value for the developer of, I run Git branch and it's so fast. But no, I want to be able to make a branch for the header bug fix, the footer bug fix, the sidebar bug fix, and show those to the stakeholders in isolation so that I end up pushing 3 branches to what become 3 multi-dev environments. And I can say, did I fix the header? Yes or no. Did I fix the footer? Yes or no. Did I fix the sidebar? Yes or no. And I hope they say, yes, you fixed all 3, merge them all. But they might say, no, you did not understand our request related to the footer. That is not good to go. So don't merge that one. And okay, that's a normal thing. And that relatively normal workflow is more easily accomplished if me trying to spend a maximum amount of my available billable hours in this sprint on the features my stakeholders care about, I don't want to spend any of those billable hours thinking about the details of wait, what exactly is happening inside of GitHub Actions? Because yes, while any number of teams may prefer Cypress or Playwright for end-to-end testing, the part that just gets the code from here to here to here, there's less value in bike shedding the differences in how that flow might happen.
The story I tell about my first experience with multi-devs on Pantheon was I was working at web dev and we had a project and it happened to be on Pantheon and multi-dev. It was a site that allowed multi-devs, and I was like, great, this is amazing. We can develop on a feature branch, like you said, have a multi-dev. It's all. And then as soon as I was on the next project, even the next project on Pantheon, it didn't have multi-devs, and I was like, wait, where is that thing that I need? And then when I changed agencies and I was at HumanMade, we had built our own development and a staging environment and production environments, and we had this bespoke thing that was built on AWS, and I was like, this is great, but whenever we wanted to push code and test the code and show the example of doing the stuff in the header, the footer, and the sidebar, then we'd have to merge it into dev and make sure that whatever gets merged into dev is not what gets merged into the staging environment or the production environment. Dev is like the dev environment, the messy stuff with all sorts of experimental code, which is fine, but it means that you have to like reframe your brain. You have to be really careful about how things go. You have to maybe you have to revert things or clean stuff up at the end. Like it would be so much better if we just had a single environment for each branch. And of course, the DevOps folks are like, yeah, but that's hard, and that's why I've always said, why I'm here at Pantheon, why I've always said, like, multi-dev is the thing that makes my life easier, and So
Yeah.
having this natively just built into the action obviously makes sense. And just having those PR branches just create the multi-devs and being able to go into it is the thing. And I can
All right, let's switch up the screen share again. And Chris, I want to go slightly out of order. I want to show the additional tests that I've added to my own personal site, because they relate.
That's relevant to why a GitHub action. Why, I mean, we know multi-dev exists, but yes, let's look into that stuff.
It's also an example of do as we say, not as we do. So I showed you that demo pull request, and I made this demo pull request 1 hour ago because the substantive pull request that I have been working on, that it's gotten too big. I have not followed my own advice. I have made so I'm working on a branch that is a follow-up.
That looks like it has too many files changed.
Yes, it does have too many files changed. And because I have been changing too many files, I now have that is failing in a way that is unrelated to the main substance of this pull request. The main substance of this pull request is I'm following up to the fact that I have recently configured Solr for my personal website, or I should say I've started to configure Solr for my personal website. This follow-up pull request changes some content types and adds Solr configuration to validate that Solr is going to search in the way that I want it to search. But because I couldn't help it, I started making unrelated changes, and those unrelated changes are now causing a visual regression failure on my homepage. And my homepage does not have Solr search on it, but hey, there it is. I have this pull request, which is mostly about content type structure and some search config. It now has a failing backstop test, and I will later have to ask myself, okay, should I back out the commits that are causing this specific failure? Do I care about that? And if you've got strong opinions on that, let me know in the YouTube comments. But let me click on the wrong thing there. part of what I wanted to show here is I end up with a test suite here. So for every pull request, there's the push to Pantheon part. And I should say this has gotten longer. I may do some tweaks that make the execution of this step shorter. This is taking 7 minutes. Another change that I'm making in this pull request is re-indexing all of Solr on every push. And I don't know if that is wise for me to do. But just the push to Pantheon part can be accomplished with a relatively small amount of YAML. So I'm jumping over here to the main README. The push to Pantheon part is a relatively small amount of YAML. After the push to Pantheon completes, Backstop runs a visual regression test comparing the live environment, assuming the live environment is correct, and compares those screenshots to a screenshot of the multi-dev. And because I've been also tweaking code related to my homepage, that breaks visual regression tests on my homepage. And maybe I should back those out. Then I also get these Playwright tests. Playwright is doing end-to-end testing of my Drupal application. Might as well show what that looks like. This is a detail that is not really specific to our action, but it's the kind of thing that you get more time for if the basics are handled by the reusable action. So what we're seeing here is I'm logging into the Drupal site, and then what's going to happen here is Playwright will make a new blog post and then check that blog post shows up. I guess it's going to make 2 new blog posts and then check that they show up where they should show up and don't show up where they shouldn't show up. One of the parts I like about this is the recorded video here. And
yeah, I don't think I've done anything with Playwright that actually exposed the recording. I know that it does that, but mostly I've used it in a context of do the things and just tell me if the things pass.
Yeah,
that is pretty neat.
Yeah, when I saw even here, the username that Playwright is logging in as is Cypress, because this used to be a Cypress test. Cypress is a similar generation of automated testing tool. I am not an expert who can give you the pluses and minuses of Cypress versus Playwright. I simply see that Playwright is backed by Microsoft, and Cypress is its own startup, and that makes me think I'll go with the Playwright thing because that seems to have more stability and momentum behind it.
Yeah, there's a good chance that it will still be here next year.
Yeah.
I noticed that that in the sort of diagram that GitHub Actions, the GitHub Action interface provides, you're doing the push to Pantheon first and then running your Backstop and Playwright. And for those contexts, since you want to test the things after they're on the environment, obviously, that makes sense. I can also see a case for having things like linting or PHP unit or something happening before the push to Pantheon, or adjacent, like you have right there, to the push to Pantheon, so that it's not necessarily, or maybe blocking the push. The way that I would sort of my default fallback is I don't before I deploy anything, I want to make sure the code is good. So I would put that as a blocking step before getting. But the beauty of GitHub Actions is that you can kind of roll your own, whatever works for your sort of workflow. And in this case, this is the thing that makes the most sense.
Yeah, and that to me seems like a preference question.
Yeah.
One I'm comfortable not asserting an opinion about, and part of part of the way GitHub Actions appeals to me is the way these. I'm hesitating here because I'm going to use the perhaps overused word of compose. You can compose your workflow. I absolutely could decide that I don't want to push to Pantheon if the coding standards check fails. That would be, I think, literally a one-line pull request, because that is
just moving things around.
This needs statement here. So
right.
What this says is that the backstop job needs push to Pantheon to happen. I absolutely could say the push to Pantheon step here needs coding standards to run first. But yeah, in working on these things, we're finding, slight preference differences between ourselves, Chris. I'm of the mindset of like, no, I don't want white space changes or white space coding standards violations to block the push to Pantheon, because that'll block me from merging. But I don't want that to block the deployment if I put 4 spaces where I should have put 2 spaces. Similarly, I want Playwright to run. I want those end-to-end tests running, even if backstop failed, because of situations exactly like this one, where the backstop failure failure is a strong word to describe what is happening here.
Visual regression is...
Yes,
there's a fairly... I would say there's a high likelihood of a visual regression failure that is not relevant to the behavior of a website. I mean... Exactly.
Substantively, I'm hard coding the content. I'm hard coding the content on my homepage. I feel like I should whisper that confession. If there is demand for it, like a future live stream could be me unhard coding the content of my homepage and moving it to Experience Builder or Layout Builder. But for what Pantheon is and does, it's more important for Pantheon staff to focus on these deployment details, I think, than it is to focus on Experience Builder versus Layout Builder. I care about that stuff too, but it's less important for Pantheon to assert any specific preference on those sorts of things.
That's actually a really good segue into, obviously your site is a composer, or as a Drupal site. Obviously you can use this action on WordPress sites as well. And I also am using the GitHub action on a couple different WordPress sites, but one in particular.
Yes.
And the segue here is that you're hard coding your homepage, whereas I have an arguably less interesting homepage that is using Gutenberg or using the full site editor. So this is not hard coded. It could be, maybe it even should be. There's only one thing on the page, but no, in fact, this is using full site editing to create this this link back to itself on this site that if you just visited s3q.us, you would see nothing. But for me, it is a link builder. It's a thing that I think I blogged, or I did a video about a few months ago, where I can create shortened URLs. It's a URL shortener that I have, and I built it from scratch with a redirect plugin, and then a couple custom widgets. So I just log in and I can pick what the long URL is and what I want it to redirect to, and then I have this little panel right here that says these are my favorite ones up here, and these are some other ones that I can copy and paste. And I noticed as I was going into this the other day, oh, a WordPress update is available. I'm using 6.8 and there's 6.8.1. So I have a pull request over here. One of the GitHub actions that I use frequently is a composer diff action. So this is a composer-based site, and what this action does is it gives me a nice little display of the things that changed between in this case, the main branch and this PR branch. And then again, we've got the PR, and I can click on the deployment to see that it did stuff, but mostly this is, again, like the site doesn't look like anything. So it's mostly to make sure that it didn't break. But notably, this is updating WordPress to 6.8.1 from roots because it's using the Bedrock upstream, and I can just click the button, and it'll do that. And also, I have, like, I'm using Quicksilver because I'm eating our own dog food. So you can see I've got a little Quicksilver script that puts this in Slack, a message to let me know that something happened. And I'll get another update when this is done deploying the change to the main branch. But that's the GitHub action. We've been talking about the GitHub action for a minute.
Yes.
Let's talk about the GitHub application. You teased the application. I'll pull my screen off for a minute and we'll come back to it, but maybe you can describe in a elevator pitch what the difference between the action and the application is, and how they're related, and how they're similar, how they're different. I will note that the model in your diagram for the action and the application is largely identical.
Yes, at the fidelity of a crayon drawing with less than a half dozen boxes. It's the same. Even the letter A is the same. The difference is that GitHub Actions is, dare I say, a general purpose CI, continuous integration tool. As I say that out loud, I remember I've at least once seen a tweet or something saying GitHub Actions is not continuous integration. I'll put that aside. For our purposes today, GitHub Actions does general purpose continuous integration. GitHub Applications are older. They are general purpose integrations with GitHub. They're essentially a way for companies like Pantheon or other technology companies that might have need to integrate their services with GitHub services to provide authorization to act, say, on a repository, make changes to a repository, get notifications about changes to a repository. So going back to my early days with Pantheon, I assumed, oh, that is the thing we need. The thing we need is for Pantheon to authenticate with GitHub. Like Chris, the customer of both, tells GitHub, yes, Pantheon has permission to see what's going on in this repo. And then GitHub will tell Pantheon, hey, a new commit has come in on the main branch. Do you want to do something with that? And Pantheon would say, yes, I do want to do something with that. Pantheon then grabs the contents of the main branch. In the case of a Drupal site, executes composer build, composer install. I'm thinking of npm run build. Executes composer install and puts that on our container that is going to run the Drupal site. And for a WordPress site that is not composer based, perhaps all Pantheon needs to do is clone, maybe even a shallow clone of the contents of that main branch, or perhaps pull request environment. So again, at the level of this diagram, the slight distinction here is, where is that clone happening? In GitHub Actions, the clone, the getting of the code of whatever's the latest in the main branch is happening on GitHub infrastructure. If you're using the Pantheon app, it's happening on Pantheon infrastructure. But you asked me for the elevator pitch, and I didn't really give you.
Yeah, what I will summarize.
Yes.
I think I could summarize by saying, with the application, like the action will ultimately your code lives on GitHub, but it's going to be pushing that code onto the Pantheon Git repository and just making sure those two things are constantly in sync, right? And the application is basically taking out that Pantheon Git repository out of the equation, and your code really just lives in one place, which is GitHub, or in the future, wherever, GitLab, Bitbucket,
Yeah.
whatever. It just lives there, and Pantheon just knows what to do with it.
Yeah, and I see Jack is in the comments here. I think Jack has been one of the people asking, "Hey, when is the Bitbucket version of this stuff coming?" And to answer again for the audience, basically it'll come when we feel like the GitHub integrations app and action are solid enough, satisfactory, and then we'll make the Jira tickets actually probably do exist already.
Yeah,
we'll say like, now do those Jira tickets that take those things, action and app, and replicate them in their Bitbucket counterparts. Although I should say, there's nothing stopping anyone from making a Bitbucket pipe. Bitbucket pipe being the term for reusable steps of CI instruction for Bitbucket's, somewhat synonymous with GitHub Actions. The other sort of elevator pitch level detail that is worth highlighting to distinguish between the action and the application is there's really no, for better or worse, there's no configurability to the application. You turn it on, and then that GitHub repo is paired with that Pantheon site, and that's it. So that influences to some degree the answer to Paul's question here. Is there a plan in the roadmap for theme building in Pantheon with Node on a Drupal WordPress site? And I dropped a link into the chat, but I might as well show it on the stream as well. In the usage of the GitHub action, you can, before executing the push to Pantheon part, do a step that processes your Node.js. And I'm did a double take there because there might be a typo in that README, but I'll show my actual one. This is how I'm doing it on my own personal site. And I did legitimately recently rename the theme name on my personal site to my custom theme to make it more copy pastable for example code. So in the push to Pantheon job, after that job checks out the code, clones the GitHub repo, then we cd, change directories into the theme directory, do an npm CI, an npm run build, and then this could all be one step. But I then rm, I remove a git ignore file that lives in the CSS directory. I used to have long discussions and arguments about where is the appropriate place to put this package.json file if the thing we're doing is really all for my simple site. I'm doing some Tailwind processing here, and I'm doing that in the theme. I think years ago I used to think, no, this package.json should be at the root too. Like, no, for the way my mental model works here, this is a property of my custom theme. And so the package.json file is in my custom theme. It has a dependency on Tailwind. It builds some CSS. Some of that CSS is CSS that just came over via the normal Drupal theme creation process. And then some of it is Tailwind generated CSS. And so I've got this git ignore file that is ignoring the Tailwind build output CSS file, because I don't want that. I don't want my pull requests muddied by diffs in here, because that would be hard to visually scan. But I do want that committed when it is pushed to Pantheon by the push to Pantheon action. We do have it on our roadmap to do this kind of processing on Pantheon infrastructure as well. And I'll even say, like, the general problem space as I see it here is like just build steps, or the general term is build steps. And for many teams, composer install is a build step, and npm build is a build step. Those should or could happen in the same place. So some teams want to do those co-located. I want Pantheon's own infrastructure to be able to do both of these things, because it's basically required for Drupal. We do this step on Pantheon infrastructure through our integrated composer feature, and I'll say some teams have even figured out how to make that composer installation process do the npm build part. That has not been reliable, and we should not encourage that because it's unreliable. But that is something that is on our roadmap to handle more cleanly than having composer process your npm.
But coming back to the application, the GitHub application, I don't have a site, or I do have a site. I don't have a command line thing to set up the site, but I do have a website, and I will sort of cross promote a thing that I started doing, officially launched a couple weeks ago, which is a podcast that I'm doing called Community in Code. And when I created this site on Pantheon, I created it with by using the new GitHub application. And basically, the GitHub application is you run a terminus command, a site create command, and it will create a GitHub repository for you with whatever upstream you're using. And again, I'm using the WordPress Composer Managed upstream. And then this becomes your source of truth. I noticed today, so I'm not doing anything super exciting with the PR today, because this is a live site and I'm pretty happy with it. Again, this is using Gutenberg and full site editing. There's a new episode that dropped today, also plug, in case you are interested in checking it out. But I have a PR over here that just adds a link to the README file, because the README file just has the sort of the logo, link to the actual website. And again, over here, the difference between this and I guess we have show environments. Yep, there we go. It has deployment. You're not going to see anything in the deployment because it's just a README file, but it's doing the same thing that the GitHub Action is doing, in that it is creating a multi-dev natively. I could click on this link, and if I was doing anything substantive on the site, I would be able to go over here and see the multi-dev. You can see previously haven't deleted this multi-dev, but I was installing the MailPoet plugin to do some newsletter, basically I have a newsletter that sends out an email whenever there's a blog post published about an episode, so that people can subscribe to the newsletter and get notifications. So I'm using MailPoet to handle that. And so I have a PR for that was adding that plugin and testing out that plugin, and that we go over here. Obviously, that was merged. That was PR number 6. But again, to go back to the diagram, the diagram's identical, right? I push my code to GitHub in a branch. That branch creates a multi-dev. I can look at that multi-dev. The difference here is that when I go over to my site, there's no updates. There's nothing here because the commits are actually happening in GitHub. I can, however, see that this is a little bit stale because it was in the middle of creating stuff, but I can see that I pushed code, it created a multi-dev, it did the composer install stuff, It also posted a message to Slack when the multi-dev was created, and to let me know that that was a thing that happened. Does the composer install with everything? I Notably, it's sort of a clean environment every single time, so it does installing every time, as opposed to like updating, because the code server doesn't live on Pantheon. It lives in GitHub, which is also, I'll just point this out because you probably may have already seen it scroll by. Like, I have all these like failed backups. The reason why the backups are failing is because there is no code server. Because the code lives on GitHub. That's a bug that there's an issue. It is a thing that this is still in a private beta, so it's still early days. But that is a thing that hopefully, I'm hoping, will get fixed before we go into general availability, because I don't like seeing a bunch of failed messages that are making me freak out that my backups are failing. But actually my backups aren't failing because the database is right there, the files are there. I just don't have the code because the code didn't live there. Yeah, so that's for the sake of showing and not just telling. That is the application sort of as it exists. Steve, I know you've been playing with the application in some context too. Do you have anything to sort of elaborate, or things that you want me to dig into to point out for our audience?
Well, one thing that comes to mind, just because it got discussed in a different GitHub issue in the last day. This is the main path that gets us off of usage of the term master in Git.
Mm-hmm.
If Pantheon had started like 2 or 3 later, there's a very good chance that Pantheon would not have taken on the responsibility of hosting Git servers. There's a good chance that had Pantheon started later, we would have just used the GitHub expectations, the same way many similar companies that assume that a code base exists and then does stuff with it. Plenty of other companies don't take the responsibility of hosting their own Git servers. We did, and we hard-coded the assumption that the default branch is master and not configurable, and that was a questionable decision. By doing this GitHub integration, both the application uses the main branch, and for my with the action, there's more choice. And for my own personal site, I'm using main as the branch name.
Yep, same. And so I just merged that PR, and you can see it's syncing code. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to push anything. There's no middle step of something happening on GitHub like we have in the action doing stuff. I just hit merge, and now it's automatically syncing that code to my dev environment. And after it finishes that stuff and takes the screenshot and sends a message over to Slack, then I will see that. Well, I won't see it here. And I probably won't see it anywhere because it's just a README file again. But it will be reflected in the code base that the Pantheon site is using.
Yeah. As long as we're near the end here and running down just the list of other stuff worth mentioning, the GitHub application does not have SFTP mode, as we call
Correct.
it. The dubiously named SFTP mode, perhaps more accurately referred to as on-server development mode. I care about that detail because I use it most for exporting configuration from my Drupal site, because a thing that I like to do, or probably doing on my 2 large pull requests, I'm starting a pull request, a multi-dev is made, and I'm tweaking Solr configuration in relation to the Solr server that's available on Pantheon. And as I tweak that configuration, I need that configuration back in the Git repo. And the way I'm presently doing that is by doing the config export on the Pantheon Multidev environment while in SFTP mode, on server development mode. and then committing that on Pantheon, downloading the result. With the GitHub application, we do not allow multi-devs or dev environments to be switched into that writable on-server development mode. And it is an open question how we should proceed. Because also in the years since Pantheon started, tools like, I always say the wrong thing, code sandboxes? No. What are they called?
Code spaces?
Code spaces. Why do I always want to say code sandboxes? Code spaces have come into existence.
Because everything is a sandbox?
Right, yes. Code spaces have come into existence, and perhaps for the situations like the one that I was describing of like, I have a pull request open and I want to do just like a little bit of code tweaking, perhaps a code space is the better tool for that kind of thing.
I have actually another sort of hard example of a workaround that I've had to figure out for the community in code site. Because I'm using Object Cache Pro. Object Cache Pro is obviously pulled in with your Pantheon subscription. You have get access to Object Cache Pro if you're on the WordPress site. Object Cache Pro has an object cache.php file, and typically this file is dropped into your WP content directory as a drop-in. It's sort of an automatically executed file that is part of WordPress, but it's not a plugin, it's not a theme, it's not an MU plugin, it's something else, and those files can change. And I ran into an instance where there was an Object Cache Pro update that updated the Object Cache PHP file, and I got a message in my dashboard that said, your Object Cache drop-in is out of date. How do I deal with that when I can't just update the code and I don't really want to commit that file to version control? That would actually mean I'd have to make sure I had a local environment. The local environment works. I could do the thing and then I would commit the code. So so what I figured out is, and what seems to be working now, because I have it, is I'm just creating a symlink into the app directory, which is essentially in the composer-based WordPress world, that is the equivalent of WP content. It symlinks out to where that file lives in the Object Cache Pro folder, so that whatever version of Object Cache Pro I'm using, I'm always just pointing to that object cache.php file in the place where the object cache.php file needs to live for Object Cache Pro to function properly. So that's another sort of like, so at first I was like, okay, if we don't have on-server development or SFTP mode, we're going to run into issues like this, where like there's just files you need to drop in somewhere, right? But because we can still symlink, because we can still point things in different ways and then commit those things to Git, I was able to, I'm pretty happy with this solution, because I feel like it means that I never need to worry about that drop-in, like literally ever. There's a button in Object Cache Pro to like regenerate the drop-in. I never need to click that button because it's always just going to be there. So it might mean like maybe I don't care about SFTP mode. Maybe I am fine with just using Git. I mean, I would like to say I'm fine with just using Git. I, as a developer who doesn't want to ever touch SFTP mode again, I know that there's a lot of people on Pantheon who do SFTP for a variety of things, and I, more power to you. I think that that's great, but I personally, I would like to think about it less, and this is one way that it makes me think about it less.
All right. Well, perhaps a topic for a future live stream.
Sure. I'm sure we could get way into the weeds about that. All right. Well, to summarize, what did we see? We saw some stuff. You can go out today to the Pantheon GitHub repository /push to Pantheon and get and set up the action. Steve, I don't remember, is it published in the marketplace? Can you do a search in the GitHub Actions marketplace for it, or is that still something that I need to do?
we need to
You can
make,
use it without it being in
yeah.
the marketplace. I don't know that it's exposed to the marketplace.
We need to check the checkbox the next time we make
Yeah.
a release
Okay.
to add it to the marketplace. And as long as we're talking about making another release, okay, yes, I was wondering if I had a typo in here. I don't think I have a typo in this section, but we'll find some other reason. I think has been one small commit, maybe 2 small commits since the 0.6.1. So anyway, we'll get 0.6.1 cut soon. We'll put it in the marketplace, and that'll make it easier to discover. But yes, for anyone watching, you can use it simply by directly referencing it.
And if you want to be invited to the private beta of the GitHub application and play with that, I'm going to drop a link in the I was about to say Slack, in the chat to a Google form that's going to go to our product owner, and I think he's doing it in sort of in waves. So you might not get like immediate access, but you might get it at a certain point as we add more people. But this will give you access to the thing that I showed, where it's basically GitHub, or you push your code to GitHub, and there's no sort of additional pushing step because your code being pushed to GitHub just syncs up with the Pantheon site. I will say that it's currently one site, one repository, so it's not a thing that if you use a single repository for a bunch of different sites, it doesn't really work in that context yet. You, like, again, merges into your main branch, or your default branch are going to be the things that get pushed up. That's effectively your development branch. So things like having an action or a series of actions in between that step before you push to Pantheon, that's not necessarily gonna, that workflow wouldn't necessarily work. But there's a lot of pluses. Like, for my community and code site, I don't necessarily care about these things. I do care about like linting and testing and styling and all that sort of stuff, and those will block PRs, but it doesn't necessarily need to block pushing to Pantheon, or for the code to exist on Pantheon. I should even stop using the phrase pushing to Pantheon, because it's not even pushing, it's just, it exists there. That's where Pantheon is looking.
All right. Well, I'm excited to keep using these. Feel free, if you have feedback, open issues, pull requests. We did get a community contribution from Eric Schultz doing a tweak to what happens inside the action. So we'll take that kind of feedback. I'm excited to see more usage of this.
Yep, absolutely. All right.
All right.
Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.